in Athenian. Wait a minute. Okay, I think I left out some of that text. I did. I deleted some of that text. Okay, so what his response is if this guy from Podunk town had been born in Athens, he wouldn't have been as famous as Themistocles. And if Themistocles had been born in that little town, he would have done better than this guy did. Basically, what he's saying is it isn't the town, like compare it to if you're trying to be famous, um, becoming a famous actor, or you're trying to be a musician. You might want to live in Hollywood or in Memphis, because the city will help you make it big. And this guy is saying you only made it big because of where you live. But Themistocles is saying no, it's based on his character, because had he been from the small town, he still would have done pretty well. And had this guy been from the big town, he still would not have done well because of his character. So the same principle applies excellently to those who, not being rich, take old age hard. So he's comparing now fame and wealth. For neither would the reasonable man, so somebody who's loves reason, who's like a philosopher, find it altogether easy to endure old age conjoined with poverty. So even the most reasonable man would have some difficulties in old age if he was poor. It would make it hard. But the unreasonable man, even if he got rich, would never attain to self-contentment and cheerful temper. So a person who's unreasonable, unphilosophical, or bad character isn't going to do well in life, even with a lot of money. And the person who has a good character is still going to do pretty well in life, even without the money. And then he's talking about, as a moneymaker, he's in between his father and grandfather, kind of takes a middle road. He doesn't squander it away. He builds it up, but he doesn't try to become super rich like his grandfather was. So it's all about this moderation. And Socrates asked him, well, what do you think is the greatest benefit you get from money? I'm just going to skip through this a little bit. He says, well, and I mentioned this earlier, when you start thinking about what happens after you die and whether or not, of course, these were religious people. They believed in many gods. They believed in some kind of afterlife. So they believed that there was going to be a consequence for being a good or a bad person. And so Cephalus says it helps having money to pay off my debts and not owe anybody, because that would be unjust. So it's helpful as a tool. And that way, when a man lives out his days in justice and piety, again, living honorably and honoring the gods, then he has hope in his old age. And I affirm that the possession of wealth is of most value, not to every man, but to the good man, not to cheat any man, even unintentionally, or play him false. So don't cheat even by mistake or lie. And not being in debt to a god. So they believe that they had to pay their tithes and give sacrifices and so forth to honor their gods, or to be in debt to a man for money. To this result, the possession of property contributes not a little. There are a lot of other uses for it, but for that for a man of sense, again, a reasonable man, this is the chief services of wealth. So again, money doesn't make you happy, but it helps. It helps because it's easier to live that way. But the most important thing is it makes it easier to live a just life, because there's less temptation or need to try to beg, borrow, or steal. So character and justice. So this is about the end of Cephalus's whole involvement with this book. He just mentioned the word justice. That's the first mention in the Republic. And Socrates kind of grabs onto that, says, but speaking of this very thing, justice, are we to affirm without qualification that justice is truth-telling and paying back what you've received from anybody? Or can these things sometimes be just and sometimes unjust? So Socrates is doing what he does. He wants a definition of justice. So if a good character means being just, then let's figure that out by defining what justice is. And so he challenges Cephalus, say, isn't there, and he uses examples like, what if you, I think I've got it here. What if you borrowed a friend's weapon, a sword, or now a gun, and that friend, while you happen to have his weapon, later goes insane. He's crazy now. And he comes back to you and wants his sword or his gun back. Would it be just to return what you owe him because it's his gun or it's his sword? Or would it be better to tell him you don't know where it is? So to lie to him and not return. You're right, says Cephalus. Then this is not the definition of justice, to tell the truth and return what one has received. So it's often just to do that, but it's not always just to do that. Think about lying to hide Jews during the Holocaust. Many, there were examples of people who were fine, upstanding citizens in Germany and elsewhere in Europe who probably would normally not ever lie, but in order to hide Jews from being taken away and killed, they lied, and they probably felt fine about it because that circumstance, situational ethics, there are situations where lying may be the right thing to do. And so it doesn't fit. So that's not the definition of justice. Polymarchus jumps in now. It's Cephalus' son. And he goes, no, it is, Socrates, if indeed we are to put any faith in Simonides. So now he's bringing in another philosopher, Simonides. And Polymarchus wants to argue with Socrates, which is what Socrates wants to do. And by argue, it doesn't mean yell. It means figure this out. Let's figure out what the definition is. But Cephalus says, very well, indeed, I make over the whole argument to you. He goes, so him and Socrates kind of started this conversation that now evolved into a debate about justice. And Cephalus says, I give it all to you guys, for it's time for me to attend to the sacrifices. So when they got to his house, he'd just gotten done doing some sacrifices. Evidently, he's still dressed the way he is because he has more to do. So he goes, I don't have time to get into a conversation now. I've got things I've got to do. And that's it. That's the end of that's the end of Cephalus's direct involvement in the Republic. So in books 4 and 9 is in both those parts of the Republic is when Socrates in this discussion, they've really finally come to identify what a just man or woman would be. Comes to that conclusion in book 4, and then there's a diversion into discussing other things such as the divided line, the cave, and what is the good, and all of that. And then they come back to it in the book 9. So in book 4, and so I'm talking about this now. We have Cephalus saying what is important in life is a good character. Socrates starts a conversation of, okay, so a good character is a just character, but how do we know what a just character is? All the way till book 4, the rest of them, Cephalus is gone, but they're all debating that, and they come to a conclusion. And having linked and bound all three together, 3 parts of the psyche, and made himself one unit, one man instead of many, self-controlled and in unison, he should then and only then turn to the practice if he find aught to do, either in the getting of wealth or the tenets of the body, or it may be in political action or private business. So what he's saying is the just man will take care of his internal business first, develop a just psyche, and focus on that more or before he focuses on what else he's going to do in life. What's his what's his living going to be in life? Philosopher, moneymaker, what have you. And in all such doings, believing and naming the just and honorable action, that which preserves and helps to produce this condition of soul, and wisdom the science. So again, going back to Cephalus, I say we can fit Cephalus into this. Cephalus was a successful man, and from the questions that Socrates put to him, we see that he always held character as primary over what else he did. Um, in Book 9, again, from every point of view, then, the panegyrist of justice speaks truly and the panegyrist of injustice falsely. So back to the conversation, panegyrist is when you speak well of something. It's a panegyrist speaks well, gives a speech about praising something, and and Socrates is saying that I'm getting lost a little bit here. In that conversation, they talked about who's praising justice and who's praising injustice, because that was the whole argument. Is it better to live a just life or an unjust life? So they found that whether we consider pleasure, reputation, or profit, so here are some of those categories, and the specifics Cephalus talked about, such as wine, women, and whatever the other one was. I'll say song. It fits into the pursuits of pleasure. When he talked about how his family treated him and his reputation, fits in reputation. And then, of course, we know he was a businessman. He went for profit, but moderate profit. He who commends justice speaks the truth, while there is no soundness or real knowledge in those who hold up injustice. So what will the just man do? He will not be dazzled by the felicitations of the multitude. So just like today, what do most people hold up as what's important in life? Well, popular society would say what's important, what'll make you happy is having money, having status, having power, having good looks, being famous. Look at Hollywood, look at sports stars. Uh, our society often says the way to be happy is to have all that stuff. But Socrates has already they've come to the conclusion that those aren't the things that make you happy. Those things can make life better or worse depending on your character or your psyche. So piling up massive wealth without measure isn't good. It only involves you in measureless ills. Again, heard stories of athletes becoming rich and famous, actors, child actors especially, or people winning the lottery suddenly have all kinds of money and fame, and their lives are horrible, not good lives. So involving themselves with measureless ills. So the just man will rather keep his eyes fixed on the constitution in his soul, the auto Politeia, guarding lest he disturb anything there by excess or deficiency of wealth. So a just person will guard against excess or deficiency of wealth. In other words, it's not good to be poor necessarily. It's harder to be poor. Doesn't mean you can't be happy and poor, but it definitely makes life harder. So a well-rounded, just person will try to have a moderate income, but not have his or her life focused on amassing great wealth. And the manners of honors and office, so again, relationships, the things of the spirited part, this too will be his guiding principle. He will gladly partake and enjoy those which he thinks will make him a better man, but in public and private, whether people know it or not. He will shun those that may overthrow the established habit of the soul. The established habit of the soul is to be just, to balance out the different parts with the different virtues. Okay, so we're getting close to the end. Book 10, Wages of the Just. So in Book 10, again, I'll refer you back to Plato's superego for a little more detail on this. But the myth of is an after-death parable, and it brings us full circle to the beginning of the Republic when Cephalus is talking about dying with a clear conscience. So at the very beginning, Cephalus brings this up. One of the benefits of money and just being a just person is you can die, and if there is an afterlife, you assume that you're going to get rewarded because you've been good. Um, when Socrates in the Apology is going off to face death, he says, he essentially says, whether we die and there's something after this, or we just go to sleep and that's it, he's going to die at peace because he knows he lived a good life. Here's another little thing in there about in book 10. Do not your smart but wicked men fare as those racers who do well from the scratch, but not back from the turn. Okay, so in life, again, talking about whether you should live a just life or an unjust life, living an unjust life might help you at first. It's like the scratch is like the line that a racer starts from. And if you run, a marathon for sure, which life is a marathon. If you run your hardest at first, you're going to lead the pack. But when it comes to the turn and coming back to get back to the beginning and the end of the race, you're going to be lagging and dragging. So if you cheat, lie, and steal to get ahead, you'll get ahead for a while. But then you'll start falling behind as your reputation, and as we've seen, what an unjust person, it's not just about how you treat others, but it's how healthy you are inside of yourself. It compares justice to health, and your mental health will decline as well as things external to you. The true runners, when they have come to the goal, receive the prizes and bear away the crown. So back to the crown, like Cephalus was wearing. Is not this the usual outcome for the just also, that towards the end of every action and association of life as a whole, for the most part, those who are just have honor and bear away the prizes from men? Yeah. So compare it to a race, cheating might get you ahead in the short run. In the long run, it doesn't pay off. A just life pays off in the long run. The lots of life determine the opportunity, but character determines success. So those of you remember in the myth of it's you get to choose what your next life is going to be. And there are you can choose anything, and each one of those lives, like whether you're going to be a tyrant or a farmer or whatever, it's like choosing what are you going to do in life. Do I want to go to college? Do I want to become an engineer? Do I want to become a professional singer? Like whatever occupation and life you want to live, they all have benefits and downsides. Those all have an effect, and the chances, the lots in life have an effect on you. But what has the most effect in your life is how you live it based on your character. So again, it's that short game versus playing the long game. Now, so again, the connection between the first chapter, remember Socrates asked Cephalus, is old age, is it a rough road, or is the path easy and smooth? Well, in book 10, we have in the myth, when you die, you either go to heaven for 1,000 years or you go to Hades or hell for 1,000 years. And then at the end of 1,000 years, you come back and you get to choose what your next life's going to be. Part of it's by chance, but also how you live that life is going to be based on what kind of a person you've developed into. Are you a just person or not? And there's a lot more in the previous video about that. But what I'm talking about here is just showing how book 1 and book 10, they tie together. The topics that Cephalus is talking about, even using the reference to a rough or smooth road comes up. The issue of the victor wearing a crown. Cephalus was wearing a crown in the beginning. Remember, what I want to do is show that I believe Cephalus is a living example of what a just man, what a philosopher king is that Plato's talking about. It's not a book about politics. It's not about an actual leader of a country. It's about each of us is the leader of our own life, and how we live it. Are we going to be kings and queens of ourselves and be aware and in charge and managing ourselves? Or are we going to be ruled by our appetites or what have you? And it isn't that some lofty thing to be a philosopher king, like many people think. Again, a lofty thing meaning like an actual king or president or somebody in charge of a country. No, it's being in charge of your own life, and every person can do that, and live a happy and healthy life, no matter what their occupation or where they live or whatever, or at least they can make the most out of life. And so Cephalus, this little character at the beginning that kind of kicks the whole conversation off, is an example of the average person who's lived a very good life. So the myth of takes into account all the myriad situations a person can be born into and can run into in life, all these chances or circumstances, but also the choices that we make. There's good and bad luck, but there's also good and bad habits. We don't have a way to control our luck or the chance things that happen to us in life, but we do have a way to control or improve our habits, our character, our psyche. So the lottery of life is what you make of it. There are various things outside of our control throughout life: health, wealth, natural abilities, all of that. How your life turns out depends in part on these things, but also on what you make of them. That's what I just said. Sorry about that. So getting to the end of this presentation, remember Cephalus in book 1. He's a successful, happy, honest, just person at peace with death, which could be the next day, it could be in a few years, but he's at the end of his life, they suppose. And he's seated on some kind of couch. Think of it like a throne, with a crown on his head, enjoying a dialogue with Socrates and these visitors who have popped in. They just popped in on him, but he's attending to his business. He's just been, he's a successful businessman, and he's also been out paying his just dues to whatever god or gods he worships. And he wants to talk. He tells Socrates, I'm happy to see you. I want you to come back more. There's nothing I enjoy more now than reasoned discussion. But I've got responsibilities to attend to. He's taking care of business. That's what a just man or woman does. So there's one last topic, but that's my summary. That's my case for Cephalus. I believe Cephalus was not just, he wasn't an example of how not to live, like some people think. He was an example of how to live. He wasn't an example of somebody who was too old to do philosophy. He loved philosophy more than ever because his age actually helped him to be freed of some of the things that distract us when we're younger. And he was even presented, the way he was dressed and everything else is like a philosopher king. And that's really what the book is about. The book is about how every one of us, no matter where we live or any other situations in our life, we can make the most out of our life, or we can add to our troubles based on our character or the health of our psyche. Now, last topic here. The antidote to bigotry or bias or racism, as I said at the beginning. So this topic is unfortunately all too prevalent in our society right now. And there's definitely a real problem, but some of the answers to that problem, I think sometimes makes the problem even worse. So this is what I think the true antidote to bigotry or bias is. First of all, famous quote from a modern philosopher: "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin." I get emotional. But by the content of their character. It's a beautiful saying. Martin Luther King, back in 1963, his famous "I Have a Dream" speech is one of the things he said. I don't think there's been a better, well, this captures what the Politeia is all about. It's about character. Martin Luther King recognized that it was the character of the person that should be judged, not the color of their skin, right? So the antidote to not being racist or being a bigot of any kind, whether it's about race or about gender or about socioeconomic class or what have you, the antidote to not being a racist is to judge all people by their individual character, or in other words, the health and justness of their psyche. Now, the antidote to says being controlled by racism, I should say to not being controlled by racism or bigotry. So, first it's like, how do you not be a bigot? This is on like, how do you not be controlled by other people's bigotry? First of all, I want to say, by no means am I saying that you should ignore or accept being mistreated. But I think the most important thing, or the thing that gets missed these days in the discussions, is don't let it become part of your identity, being treated unfairly. Because if you let it become part of your identity, then it will become part of your fate. Racism and bigotry are bad. We should fight against them. We should work towards changing those things. But how we handle it when we're faced by it is even more important than what's facing us. Focus on being just, on developing the strength of your character to determine your fate, despite any conditions that work against you. Again, this is what this book is about. This book isn't about racism and bigotry specifically. It's about all factors in life, good and bad. Bigotry is bad, so it applies to this one, and I think particularly well. So developing a just autopoliteia is living by healthy or just rules. It's what I call Platonic autonomy. So it's Platonic because it comes out of Plato. It's autonomy. Autonomy means being in charge of yourself, living by your own rules that you have thought out and recognize, rather than just going along with whatever program is around you. So I call that Platonic autonomy or Platonomy. And I just encourage everybody, be the philosopher king or philosopher queen of your own life. And thank you for your time. I smoked part of my cigar, but I got a lot more to smoke. I'm finished. I hope you found it interesting, and I hope you find it more than interesting, because philosophy, I believe in the Platonic tradition, ancient Greek and Roman tradition, is a way of life. It's not just an intellectual exercise. So I hope this somehow adds something good to your life. And with that, I will end this recording. So thank you.